Every empire believes it has rewritten the rules of money, invented something new, something permanent. But every single empire, without exception, eventually discovers a brutal truth. Money doesn't care about your innovation. Money follows laws, ancient, immovable laws that don't bend to politics, promises. They've been carved into history through centuries of collapse, rediscovered in crisis after crisis. And if you don't understand these laws, you'll spend your entire life wondering why the system feels rigged, why your savings evaporate, why the rich get richer while you work harder for less. Tonight, we're going deep into the forgotten laws of money, from the debased coins that destroyed ancient Rome to the digital illusions central banks spin today, and individuals alike. And most importantly, you'll understand why the game was never designed for you to win. In the 1500s, Sir Thomas Gresham stood before Queen Elizabeth I and explained something that would echo through centuries. When two types of currency circulate simultaneously, one trusted and pure, one debased and corrupted, people aren't stupid. When emperors started diluting the silver denarius with cheap base metals to fund endless wars and bread for the masses, Roman citizens didn't just accept it. The same pattern played out across medieval Europe when desperate kings clipped edges off gold coins or secretly replaced precious metals with copper. The lesson burns through history. When rulers try to cheat the system by debasing money, the people adapt faster than the government expects. They spend the fake and hide the real. Thiers law, named after Adolphe Thiers. In 19th century France, it reveals that in moments of absolute collapse, when the facade finally crumbles, picture Weimar Germany in the early 1920s, a nightmare economy where prices didn't just rise, they exploded. Prices doubled every few days. Families pushed wheelbarrows overflowing with banknotes just to buy a single loaf of bread. Workers demanded payment twice daily because by evening their morning wages were worthless. Nobody wanted to hold marks for even a heartbeat longer than necessary. The exact same pattern consumed Zimbabwe, devoured Venezuela, and is repeated in countless hyperinflations across continents and centuries. When citizens collectively abandon the government's promises and the social contract shatters, Thiers describes its sudden, violent death the moment the body finally stops breathing. So what happens in that dangerous gray area between slow decay and total annihilation? That's where the Cantillon Effect operates, a law that exposes the deepest unfairness in our monetary system, the invisible theft happening in plain sight. Notice something profound that authorities didn't want acknowledged. When new money enters the economy, it doesn't spread evenly like water seeking its level. Those closest to the source, the government, the central banks, the financial elites, bend it first, when its purchasing power is still intact. By the time that money trickles down through the economic hierarchy to workers, savers, the early recipients are connected, the powerful. The insiders buy assets and goods at yesterday's prices while they're still cheap. The late recipients, your neighbors. Small business owners get stuck paying tomorrow's inflated prices with yesterday's wages. The Cantillon effect is why quantitative easing after the 2008 financial crash sent stock markets to record highs while wages remained frozen. Why the wealthy own assets that appreciate while the middle class owns cash that evaporates. It's a carefully orchestrated wealth transfer from the powerless to the powerful, from savers to debtors, from Main Street to Wall Street. The system funnels benefits upward while disguising the costs as rising prices or market forces or economic recovery. The Cantillon effect is the hidden rigging of the modern financial system, and it's been silently operating since the very first coins were minted by ancient kings. If the Cantillon effect explains why new money flows uphill like water defying gravity, then financial repression explains how governments ensure. The term was coined after World War II, when shell-shocked nations faced mountains of debt taller than Everest with no easy way to pay it back. So brilliant economists and desperate politicians discovered another method, more subtle, more insidious. Trap citizens inside the system like animals in a cage, and quietly drained their wealth over decades. Central banks artificially suppressed interest rates far below the inflation rate. That meant your savings account, your prudent choice to save for the future, was mathematically guaranteed. You were being paid 1% interest while inflation ran at 4%, meaning your wealth eroded by 3% annually just for being responsible. Simultaneously, capital controls limited your ability to move money abroad or buy alternative assets like gold or foreign currency while governments inflated away their massive war debts. It was taxation without legislation, confiscation without confrontation, theft without acknowledgement. Silent, invisible, devastating over time. Fast forward to today, and savers lost literally trillions in real wealth, while asset prices exploded for those who already owned. And ordinary people watched helplessly as their savings accounts earned nothing while housing prices jumped 30%. Food costs spiked 20%, and used cars somehow became luxury items. This wasn't an accident or a side effect. And the genius of it, from the government's cynical perspective, is that most citizens never even realized what was happening to them. Some operate on the scale of entire empires, determining which nations rise and which crumble. If the US dollar served as the world's reserve currency, then America would need to supply enough dollars to finance global trade, to oil the machinery of international commerce. That required running trade deficits, spending more abroad than it earned, exporting dollars in exchange for goods. The world trusted the dollar. Global commerce expanded exponentially, and American power seemed unchallengeable. The more dollars America pushed abroad to meet global demand, the weaker the link to gold reserves became, and the more fragile trust in the entire system grew. Triffin's warning manifested exactly as predicted in 1971, when Richard Nixon unilaterally ended dollar convertibility to gold, effectively turning the dollar into pure fiat money backed by nothing but promises and military power. Since that moment, the U.S. has run chronic, massive trade deficits, exporting paper dollars in exchange for physical goods manufactured elsewhere. Factories closed, manufacturing jobs disappeared overseas, debt accumulated to incomprehensible levels. The paradox is cruel and inescapable. To remain the world's reserve currency, to maintain that exorbitant privilege, the U.S. must sacrifice the long-term health of its own productive economy. It's a law of money that guarantees decay from within even as power appears strong from without. America consumes far more than it produces, finances the gap with endless borrowing from foreigners, and the dollar's dominance props up Wall Street, while systematically hollowing out Main Street. And now, after decades of this arrangement, challenges are circling like wolves around a wounded animal. Central banks worldwide are stockpiling physical gold at the fastest pace in half a century. A clear vote of no confidence in dollar hegemony. That's the Triffin paradox in all its tragic glory. Reserve currency is simultaneously the crown and the curse, the source of power and the guarantee of weakness. If Triffin's paradox reveals how the global monetary system is trapped in an impossible contradiction. 10. Goodhart, law explains why. Every attempt by authorities to manage and control that system just makes everything worse. British economist Charles Goodhart observed something deceptively simple but absolutely devastating in its implications. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Governments and central banks worship numbers, metrics, statistics. These metrics were originally designed to describe economic reality, to measure what was actually happening in the complex machinery of modern economies. But once politicians and bureaucrats decided they must hit these targets at all costs, once the numbers became goals rather than measurements, they began distorting the underlying reality those numbers were supposed to represent. Take inflation targeting, the holy grail of modern central banking. Sounds perfectly reasonable, technical, scientific, but to hit that arbitrary target, regardless of actual economic conditions, they systematically manipulated interest rates, injected massive liquidity into financial markets, and deliberately fueled asset bubbles. Healthcare expenses and education prices soared far faster than wages, sometimes at double or triple the official inflation rate. The official numbers proclaimed stability and competence. Real life for ordinary citizens screamed instability and crisis. But once growth itself became the non-negotiable goal, once hitting that number mattered more than how you hit it, governments piled on unsustainable debt, outsourced entire industries to maintain consumption, and inflated speculative bubbles just to keep that magic number climbing upward. The result is a perfect illusion, the appearance of prosperity masking the reality of profound fragility. Fundamental trap when you start managing the numbers instead of the underlying reality. When you optimize for the measurement rather than the truth, you stop measuring anything meaningful. And finally, we arrive at the last law in our journey through monetary history. Perhaps the most relevant to our current moment, the law of diminishing returns on debt. But rather, the brutal arithmetic of our age. The math that doesn't care about your feelings or political ideology. Borrow $1, invest it productively, and generate $1 or more of GDP growth. But over time, as debt accumulates and piles higher and higher, as the easy, productive investments get made and only marginal opportunities remain, $1 of new borrowing might produce only 50 cents of real growth, then 25 cents, then even less. The machine doesn't accelerate anymore. It just groans and shudders under unbearable weight. The U.S. federal debt exceeds $34 trillion and grows by trillions more each year. Each new borrowing binge produces progressively less real wealth. But the mathematics doesn't lie, doesn't negotiate, doesn't care about elections or political promises. The French monarchy borrowed itself into complete collapse before the 1789 revolution. The British Empire strained and ultimately buckled under crushing debts accumulated through 2 world wars. The law is absolutely merciless. Borrowing buys time, extends the game, delays the reckoning. But it never provides escape. So what do all these laws teach us when we step back and see the complete pattern? That money isn't magic or arbitrary social construct. Crises force people to desperately flee into sound, tangible assets. Governments financially repress their own citizens too quietly, erase debts without the political cost of open taxation. Reserve currencies inevitably hollow themselves out from within. Measurement targets warp and destroy the underlying truth they're supposed to capture. And debt, in the end, consumes itself and everything around it. They explain with perfect clarity why inflation systematically robs savers, why wages never keep pace with living costs, why your mortgage feels heavier every year while Wall Street celebrates record highs, why nations rise on trust and fall on debt. These aren't random events or unfortunate accidents or the result of individual bad actors. And here's the hardest, most uncomfortable truth you need to accept. The game was never designed for you to win. It's structural reality. Ordinary citizens are forced to live under complete transparency, every dollar tracked, reported, taxed. Elites operate under layers of secrecy. Shell companies, legal structures designed specifically to hide wealth. You file taxes, honestly, under threat of prison. They shift assets across jurisdictions and pay specialists to minimize obligations legally. They receive money first, when it still has purchasing power. Through the Cantillon Effect, the system obeys its own immutable laws, and unless you learn them, decode them, understand how the machinery actually works beneath the propaganda and the promises, you will always play blind and still fall further behind. History doesn't repeat exactly. The details change, the technology evolves, the names are different, but money obeys laws that transcend technology and culture. And if you don't understand those laws, if you don't see the patterns, if this gave you a new lens to see the world, if you finally understand why things feel rigged, hit subscribe, and I'll keep showing you exactly where to dig.